Hey guys, welcome to Movie Hunters. Today I am going to recap a 1991 drama movie name, Rambling Rouse. So let's begin. In 1971, a man, Buddy, who is now grown and mature, visit his family house in the South. He says that visiting the southern house gives him chills and nostalgia. The thought of the people who lived in that house during his childhood, his parents and siblings, who he dearly loved, until one day he overhears his parents arguing about whether or not they should accommodate a needy young girl in an orphan. Eventually his parents agree to bring the girl in, and back then he was 13 years old. Rose, the orphaned girl, visits their house, and she becomes the first person he ever falls in love with or loves deeply, except his nuclear family members. On the fateful day Rosebud first visits them, he is outside on the balcony when he sees the great figures swinging left and right to their home. He leaves his first position and then goes towards the walkway to get a perfect view of the beauty in front of him. He watches as she lifts her legs, which are perfectly covered with a shoe. Then she arrives and approaches him. She greets him and tells him she is their new maid who will live with them, and he looks at her in excitement. He meets his mother, Mrs. Hillier, in her wedding room. He peeps to alert Mrs. Hillier. Then he tells his mother that the lady herself and his father has invited us around. She asks him what he thinks about her, and he tells her that Rose is tall, so tall that she can fall his father. But she is also feminine, and so feminine that she will never do such. Mrs. Hillier laughs at his description and she tells him she has the same opinion too. She only wanted someone to reconfirm it for her. He corrects her and tells her that as long as no one has confirmed it before, he isn't reconfirming. He is making the first confirmation. She laughs and asks him to call his siblings so she will introduce them to Rose. He brings his siblings downstairs. He has two siblings, a male and a female. Mrs. Hillier introduces the male, and the last born is Wasky. She tells Rose that his real name is Warren, but they all call him Wasky despite disliking the name, and that they may sometimes have to stop calling him that name. The little boy comments that the best time to stop calling him that name is now. Then she introduces her female child doll, or doll baby, a little girl whose real name is Frances, and she says they should call her Frances and not doll. She then introduces Buddy. She says of all her children Buddy is the smartest, and she is sure Rose must have noticed it when she met him. She says people do comment that she brags too much over her kids, but she isn't bragging, it's just the truth. She tells Rose that Buddy can be kind of evil too. As she attempts to describe Buddy's evil nature, Mr. Hillier arrives and tells her not to scare Rose away. As Rose looks at Mr. Hillier, she bites the lower part of her lips and she looks at him seductively. She welcomes her and then goes to kiss his wife before going to sit on the seat beside Rose. He tells Rose that his wife thinks hiring a maid is evil, so they aren't trying to do an evil thing just like the scoundrel did to her at Birmingham. Instead they are bringing her in as a family. She is one of them and she should behave like one. After the welcome dinner, Rose starts getting used to the family immediately. She plays with Dalla and Wasky, and Buddy looks at them from afar. Later they all sit together to prepare food. As they do so, Rose asks Buddy if the hotel his father manages belongs to his father, but Buddy replies that it's his mother's estate. She asks what an estate means and he tells her it's the property his grandparents left for his mother when she got orphaned. They talk about his mother's school, Columbia University, and he also tries to ask her about the scoundrel in Birmingham. He asks her if the men are bad people, telling her that several bad things happened, and one occurred at Cafe Spring where a man ate his nephew, and another one where a man killed his wife. She tells him he is in an evil mood and should leave her alone. They all sit for a family dinner that night and they wait for Mr. Hillier. When he arrives, he says he has insomnia and he doesn't have an appetite to eat. He asks Rose for coffee, and even before he asks, she has brought it. He tells her she is bright like a star and shining like a moon. He compliments her and taps her ass. This gets her excited that she leaves the table. Although the kids notice something is wrong, their mother, who uses a hearing aid due to her inability to hear properly, doesn't know. The following day, as the kids go to play, Rose comes to meet Mrs. Hillier. She taps her to call her attention. Then Hillier uses her hearing aid Rose asks what she is studying at the university and she replies she is studying American history just like the history a normal person. Rose asks her again if she is an orphan. Hillier replies that she was orphaned at the age of 7 and Rose says the same happened to her too. Hillier holds Rose's hands to comfort her. The kids look at them. And Buddy comments that his mother doesn't understand what's happening before her motherly emotions have been awakened by Rose. And she may not understand for a long while. During dinner, Rose feels uncomfortable in the presence of Mr. Hillier again. During the dinner, Mrs. Hillier says she has to go to a program that night. And when her husband offers to drive her, she rejects the offer and asks him to help Rose wash the dishes. After Mrs. Hillier leaves, Rose goes to Mr. Hillier. She goes to beg him to please kiss her. She tells him she can't take it any longer and that she must do something. Meanwhile, Buddy and Doll look through the door as this happens. Mr. Hillier refuses to do something that day, but she refuses to stand up from his lap. She stays on his lap begging him to touch her. He falls for the trap and touches her nude breast. However, he eventually controls himself and sends her away. That night she goes to Buddy's room looking disturbed. She says she is in love with his dad, and she doesn't know what to do. He feels fascinated by what he has seen his father do, so he asks to touch her breast. She reluctantly allows him and she enjoys it. After they finish, she begs him not to tell on her. She says they are being sold into prostitution in Birmingham, and she doesn't want to be so he should please don't tell his parents what they did. The following morning, Rose dresses provocatively, and she attempts to leave the house with Mr. Hillier. While Mr. Hillier insists her dress is bad, Mrs. Hillier thinks it's pretty. He drops her off where she is going. Then he and Buddy look at how she relates with men. Later that day, a stranger man keeps lurking around their house. This gets Mrs. Hillier scared that she calls her husband. When Mr. Hillier arrives and chases the boy runs. This makes Mr. Hillier tell his wife they can't keep staying with Rose. But Mrs. Hillier supports Rose. Another night, two men fight because of Rose in the compound. Rose denies knowing the men and Mr. Hillier gets angry. But Mrs. Hillier says Rose has the right to have a boyfriend. Another time, two men fight because of Rose at a club. The police come to arrest her, and she bites a police officer. She is arrested, and Mr. Hillier goes to bail her. This causes an argument between the two parents as Mr. Hillier insists she won't stay at their home again. That night Rose gets sick and she is taken to the hospital, where the doctor diagnoses she is having lung issues. But it's curable. The doctor starts visiting her for treatment, and she develops feelings for the doctor too. She gets better and Mrs. Hillier assumes she has changed until one day when Mr. Hillier figures someone is in her room. He knocks on the door repeatedly, and when she opens it, she insists no one is there. He checks through the window and finds a man who has just fallen outside this window. This seals Mr. Hillier's decision to fire her. He finds a job for her at a farm in Tennessee, but she starts crying and refuses to work on the farm. Mrs. Hillier reminds Mr. Hillier of her bad memory of a farm, and Rose also insists she doesn't have to have a child on a farm and claims she is pregnant. They take her to the hospital to confirm her pregnancy. The doctor says she isn't pregnant, but she has an ovarian cyst. She is sterile due to treated gonorrhea at the age of 15. He recommends that they should remove her full womb, so it will reduce her sex wants. But Mrs. Hillier refuses to do such. She tells the doctor that she will sue him if he does something so evil to a young girl, and asks them to treat her for the ovarian cyst without removing her womb. She gets treated, returns home, and tells Buddy about her father, who fell into the river drunk, and her mother who died of typhoid and TB. She goes out on a date with David, the policeman who she cut off his thumb, and when they return, David asks to meet her again. She runs inside to tell the Hilliers that she has found Mr. Right. Sometimes later she gets married to David. Old Buddy says it turns out David isn't Mr. Right, as it took her about 4 husbands for her to find Mr. Right. She is eventually married to her 4th husband for over 25 years. Buddy enters the house to meet his father as his mother is now late. His father tells him he heard the news from Rose and announces that Roz is dead. He becomes sad and cries at this news. They both acknowledge that Rose lives on, and she will always be alive in their mind, and comfort themselves by saying Rose is with Mrs. Hillier, setting the universe right. They walk away together as the movie ends here. So I hope you enjoy the video. Until we come back with the best video, stay peace, don't forget like and subscribe.